In my own home, I was overcome by a bad feeling. I pretended to go on vacation and watched from afar. Then, an elderly neighbor took me by the hand and whispered, "At midnight, you will see and understand everything." When midnight came, I fainted from the shocking truth that turned everything upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. The afternoon heat clung to my shirt as I pushed open the door to my study. My fingers found the light switch, and that's when my hand froze mid-motion. Something was wrong. Nothing dramatic. No overturned furniture or shattered glass. But after 40 years of living in this house, 30 of them as a superior court judge, I knew every angle, every shadow, every detail of this room. The manila folders on my desk sat 2 inches left of where I'd placed them. The chair was angled wrong, and the filing cabinet, my private filing cabinet, had fresh scratches around the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. I set down my water bottle with deliberate care, fighting the urge to rush forward. Instead, I circled the desk slowly, letting my eyes catalog every disturbance. The property deed folder, which I always kept facing forward, now tilted sideways. Tax documents I'd filed chronologically were shuffled. Someone had gone through these papers methodically, trying to replace them close to their original positions. Close, but not perfect. I crouched beside the cabinet, my knees protesting. The lock bore tiny scratches. Amateur work. Probably a letter opener or butter knife. I pulled the drawer open. Everything was there, but the order was wrong. My will sat beneath the insurance papers instead of above them. Financial statements showed thumbprints in the margins. Maybe I'd done this myself, moved things in a moment I'd forgotten. I was 67 after all. But even as the thought formed, I dismissed it. 30 years on the bench had taught me to trust evidence over convenient explanations. My mind might be aging, but it wasn't failing. Not yet. I stood there in the silence of my study, holding a folder with someone else's fingerprints on it, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not panic, something colder. The same instinct that had helped me catch lying witnesses, spot-forged documents, see-through rehearsed testimony. That instinct was screaming now. The question was, who? Dinner answered that question without words. I'd taken my usual seat at the head of the table. Edwin sat to my right, Euphemia across from him. The chicken was overcooked. Euphemia had never quite mastered my late wife's recipes, but I cut into it with measured precision, chewing slowly while they made small talk about their day. Then Edwin cleared his throat. "Dad, I was thinking, have you updated your will recently? Just want to make sure everything's properly organized." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I set it down with careful control, the metal clicking against porcelain louder than it should have been. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. His eyes darted to Euphemia, then back to me, too quickly. "Why do you ask?" "No reason, just smart planning, you know, at your age." "At my age?" I let the words hang there, watching a flush creep up his neck. "I see." Euphemia leaned forward, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "Wilbert, we only want what's best. Having clear documentation protects everyone, prevents confusion later." I took a sip of water, giving myself time to study her. She was good, better than Edwin at hiding nerves. But I'd spent 3 decades reading body language in courtrooms. Her left hand gripped her fork too tightly. The tendons in her wrist stood out like cables. Confusion about what exactly? She blinked, recovered smoothly. "Oh, you know, legal matters. Edwin worries about you living alone in this big house." "Does he?" Not a question. I picked up my fork again, resumed eating. Let them interpret my silence however they wanted. The rest of the meal crawled past. I pretended to watch the evening news afterward while actually studying their reflections in the darkened window behind the television. They sat close on the couch, heads together, voices low. Euphemia touched Edwin's arm, a gesture of reassurance or conspiracy. Edwin nodded, glanced toward me, then quickly away when he thought I might notice. They thought I was just watching television. They had no idea I was building a case. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation, unable to sleep. My son. My own son. The boy I'd raised, put through law school, celebrated at his wedding. Now sitting in my living room plotting, what? To have me declared incompetent? To take control of my assets? The house was worth over $1 million in this Scottsdale market. The life insurance policy another $500,000, retirement accounts, investments, the land in Flagstaff my father had left me. Plenty of motivation for someone without patience. I was up before dawn, moving through the quiet house like a ghost. The mail sat in its usual spot by the front door. Edwin must have brought it in yesterday. I sorted through the stack with careful attention. 3 envelopes had been opened and crudely resealed. 2 tax-related letters I'd been expecting were missing entirely. I pulled out my phone and checked the postal tracking app. Both missing letters showed as delivered 3 days ago. My hands trembled as I photographed the opened envelopes. Then, I steadied them through sheer will. No room for emotion now. Only evidence, observation, planning. Back in my study, I stood before the violated filing cabinet and let the rage wash through me. Then, I locked it away, deep where it couldn't interfere with clear thinking. 30 years of watching people lie taught me one thing. Everyone has a tell. Edwin's was always in his eyes. Tonight, he couldn't hold my gaze for more than 3 seconds. The pieces were assembling themselves in my mind like a legal brief. Motive, money, opportunity, living in my house. Method, still unknown, but clearly they'd started gathering information, building leverage. And they thought I was just a tired old man who wouldn't notice his own life being stolen. I sank into my desk chair and spoke quietly into the empty room. They think I'm just a tired old man. They're about to learn what 3 decades in a courtroom teaches you: how to read evidence, how to build a case, and how to strike when they least expect it. The plan began forming then. Not revenge, not yet. First, I needed information. And to get information, I needed to be invisible. I needed them to think they'd won, that I was out of the way, that they could act freely. They wanted me gone? Fine, I'd disappear. But not the way they hoped. I pulled out a notepad and began making lists. Supplies I'd need, places I could watch from, people who owed me favors. The machinery of my counterattack clicked into place with the precision I'd once used to dismantle defense strategies. By the time the sun rose over the desert, casting long shadows across my study floor, I knew exactly what I was going to do. They'd opened a door into darkness, thinking they'd find a helpless old man on the other side. Instead, they were going to find a judge. And this time, I wasn't bound by rules of evidence or procedural law. This time, the verdict would be mine alone to deliver. 2 days of planning, 2 days of playing the oblivious retiree while making careful preparations. Now, sitting at the breakfast table with Edwin and Euphemia, I was ready to set the trap. I buttered my toast slowly, took a deliberate sip of coffee, then set the cup down with casual precision. I've been thinking, that Grand Canyon trip we always talked about, I'm going to do it. 2 weeks, starting today. Edwin's fork clattered against his plate. Today? That's sudden. I shrugged, reaching for the jam. I'm retired. No time like the present. Your mother always wanted to see it. Figured I'd finally do it for her. The emotion in that last sentence was calculated, true enough to be believable, strategic enough to deflect suspicion. I watched them process it, saw the glance they exchanged, too quick, too loaded with meaning. Euphemia recovered first, leaning forward with manufactured warmth. That's wonderful, Wilbert. You deserve a break. Don't worry about anything here. Don't worry about anything here. The words hung in the air like a confession. I nodded slowly, studying my plate as if considering logistics rather than reading her face. She was already planning. I could see it in the way her fingers drummed once against the table, an unconscious gesture of impatience barely suppressed. You sure you're okay driving alone? Edwin asked, trying to sound concerned. Long trip for... He trailed off, realizing the trap he'd walked into. For someone my age? I let a sharp edge creep into my voice, watching him flinch. I didn't mean... I know you didn't, son. I softened deliberately, giving him an exit. I'll be fine. Been driving these roads for 40 years. The relief on his face was almost painful to witness. My own son, grateful I wasn't going to make this difficult for him, grateful for the opportunity to rob me. I spent the morning moving through the house with methodical precision, performing the role of enthusiastic traveler, hiking boots from the closet, camera equipment, maps of the Grand Canyon spread across the dining table, each item chosen for authenticity. But buried among the tourist supplies, I packed other things. Binoculars, good ones, with night vision capability. My old case notebook, still half full of blank pages, a small digital camera, the tools of investigation hidden beneath the costume of leisure. At lunch, I spread the map across the table and traced my planned route with one finger while they leaned in with feigned interest. I'll take Route 17 north, probably stop in Flagstaff the first night, then west to the canyon. Sounds perfect, Euphemia said, her eyes following my finger. But she wasn't looking at the route, she was looking at me, measuring, calculating how long I'd be gone. 2 weeks should be enough, I continued. Maybe I'll extend it if the weather's good. Been so long since I just existed somewhere without obligations. Take all the time you need, Edwin said too quickly, too eagerly. The afternoon heat was brutal as I loaded the truck. 108 degrees, the kind of Scottsdale summer day that made the air shimmer. I moved slowly, partly for effect, partly because my back genuinely protested. Cooler with ice and water, camping chair, sleeping bag I wouldn't need, but they'd expect to see. Edwin came out to help carry the heavier items. I led him, watching how his movements were stiff with guilt and anticipation warring inside him. When everything was loaded, I turned to face him. He moved in for a hug, and I held him for a moment, feeling how rigid his embrace was. Take care of things here, I said quietly into his shoulder. We will, Dad. We will. Euphemia waited by the door, and I accepted her kiss on my cheek. Her perfume was expensive, newer than I remembered, sharper. Purchased with anticipated money. The thought was acid in my mind, but I kept my face neutral, even warm. Enjoy yourself, Wilbert. You've earned this. I climbed into the truck, started the engine. They stood on the porch waving, their smiles too bright, their enthusiasm too sharp. As I pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror. The moment they thought I couldn't see anymore, their faces changed. Edwin's arm went around Euphemia's waist. She said something that made him laugh. They were celebrating. 20 miles east, not north. The Desert Inn Motel sat off Highway 87, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions. I checked in under the name James Morrison, a defendant I'd once acquitted, long dead now, but whose details I still remembered. The clerk barely glanced at me. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, air conditioner that rattled, television bolted to the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for darkness. 3 hours. I ate a sandwich I'd packed, drank water, tried to nap but couldn't. My mind was already back at my house, imagining what they were doing. Had they started already? Were they in my study right now, going through everything with no need for caution? The sun finally sank below the desert horizon at 7:30, painting the sky orange and purple. I waited another 2 hours until full darkness settled. Then I drove back. Different route this time. Side streets I knew from decades of living in this neighborhood. I parked 3 blocks away, in the shadows beneath a eucalyptus tree, and walked carefully through the warm night. My knees protested, but I ignored them. The vacant house across from mine had been for sale for 6 months. I'd walked past it dozens of times, noted the lockbox on the front door, memorized the code from the realtor's sign, 4732. My fingers found the buttons in the darkness, and the box clicked open. The house smelled of dust and abandonment, that particular emptiness of a place waiting to become someone's home. I moved through it without lights, letting my eyes adjust, finding the front bedroom with its clear view of my own house. Every window over there blazed with light. Both cars in the driveway. I set up my camping chair, unfolded it with a soft whisper of fabric and metal, pulled out the binoculars, raised them to my eyes, and there they were. Through my own living room window, I could see Edwin pacing. Euphemia sat on the couch, phone pressed to her ear. Animated conversation I couldn't hear, but could read in her gestures. She was coordinating something. Someone. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt that same cold clarity that used to descend during complicated trials when all the pieces finally aligned. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the target, no longer the victim being positioned and manipulated. I was the hunter now, and they had no idea I was watching. I adjusted the focus on the binoculars, settling in for a long night. 30 years I'd spent watching criminals from the bench, parsing truth from lies, justice from manipulation. Never thought I'd be watching them from an empty house across from my own home. Never thought one would be my own son. But here I was. And whatever they were planning, whatever they thought they'd get away with while I was gone, I was going to see every move, hear every word, document every crime. They wanted to write me out of my own life? Fine. I'd let them write the whole story. And then I'd show them what happens when you try to con a judge. I raised the binoculars to my eyes, focused on my own living room window, and waited to see who my son and daughter-in-law really were. 3 days of watching had left its mark. Empty coffee cups lined the windowsill of the vacant house. Fast food wrappers filled a plastic bag by the door. My back ached from the camping chair, my eyes burned from hours behind binoculars, but my mind stayed sharp. I'd documented every visitor, every light switched on or off, every movement through those windows across the street. But I hadn't seen enough, not yet. Edwin and Euphemia moved through my house with increasing confidence, but whatever they were planning remained just beyond my ability to capture it. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. My hand shot toward my phone, ready to call the police and explain my presence before someone else did. The door opened slowly. I turned, rehearsing excuses, and froze. Georgiana Elliott stood in the doorway, her slight frame silhouetted against the afternoon sun. She wore a cream cardigan despite the heat, sensible shoes, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. But what stopped me wasn't her appearance, it was the expression on her face. No surprise, no confusion, just calm recognition. "I've been watching you watch them, Wilbert." My throat tightened. "Mrs. Elliott, what are you doing here?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with the familiar ease of someone who'd done this before. "Same thing you are, discovering the truth." "I don't know what you mean." The denial came automatically, judicial habit. Never confirm what you don't have to. She moved to the window, stood beside my chair, and pointed toward my house with one thin finger. "That window, second floor. That's where I saw Euphemia photographing on Tuesday. Room by room. Very thorough." My hands clenched around the binoculars. "You've been watching my house?" "I've been watching your house for 40 years, Wilbert. We've been neighbors that long." She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, opened it to reveal neat handwriting, dates, times. "A man came Tuesday afternoon, business suit, leather briefcase, stayed 40 minutes. I leaned forward despite myself. What did he look like? 40s maybe, dark hair, professional. He came again Thursday morning. Edwin let him in both times." "You're certain?" Her eyes met mine, sharp and clear. "I may be old, but my eyes work fine." I stood, backing away from the window, trying to reclaim control. "This isn't your concern. Your family is robbing you blind," she interrupted, her voice matter of fact. "That makes it everyone's concern." The words hit like a verdict I'd been avoiding. "You don't know that, don't I?" She gestured at my surveillance setup, the binoculars, the notepad, the camping chair positioned for hours of watching. "Then why are you hiding in an empty house watching your own home?" The silence stretched between us. Outside, a car passed. Inside, the air conditioning unit rattled. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "What did you mean about midnight?" Georgiana turned back to the window, her profile sharp against the light. "They think you're far away. They're getting comfortable. Tonight, they'll make their move." "How can you be sure?" She tapped her notebook with one finger. "Patterns. Tuesday and Thursday, the man came during day. Yesterday, Edwin carried boxes to garage after dark. They're building towards something. And you think tonight? I know tonight." She looked at me directly. "Trust me." Trust. The word felt foreign. I'd spent 3 days alone with my suspicions, my shame, my rage. The idea of sharing any of it seemed impossible. This was my family, my failure, my battle to fight. But she was already pulling a thermos from a canvas bag I hadn't noticed. 2 cups, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, setting up beside me as if we'd planned this partnership all along. "Why are you doing this?" The question came out quieter than I intended. She paused, cup halfway to her lips. When she spoke, her voice carried weight I hadn't heard before. "Because I watched my own daughter steal from me before she died. I did nothing. I won't watch it happen to someone else." Something in my chest loosened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be ready." She handed me a cup of coffee. "When midnight comes, you'll need to see everything clearly. Both of us will." I took the coffee, returned to my position by the window. She pulled up a second chair, from where, I didn't ask, and settled beside me. We watched in silence as the afternoon faded into evening. The Scottsdale sky turned orange, then purple, then deep blue-black. Lights came on across the neighborhood. My house blazed brighter than the others, every window lit. Through the glass, I could see Edwin pacing in the living room, Euphemia on her phone, animated conversation, gesturing with her free hand. They were coordinating something, someone. The pieces were moving into position. Georgiana poured more coffee, offered me a sandwich. I ate without tasting it, my eyes never leaving those windows. Hours crawled past. 10 o'clock. 11. The neighborhood settled into sleep. Lights went dark, house by house. Except mine. Edwin and Euphemia remained awake, moving between rooms, checking phones, looking out windows, waiting. At 11:40, Georgiana touched my arm. Soon, my heart hammered against my ribs. 3 days of watching, and now the moment approached. What would I see? How extensive was their plan? How complete was my son's betrayal? The questions circled in my mind like vultures. Then, at 11:47, headlights swept down the street. Georgiana touched my arm again. "Here we go," she whispered. A black sedan slowed, turned into my driveway. Engine cut. Door opened. A man emerged, business suit despite the hour, leather briefcase in hand. He checked his watch, looked around with the cautious awareness of someone who knew the late hour was unusual. My front door opened before he could knock. Edwin must have been watching for him. They exchanged brief words on the porch, voices too low to carry. Then both disappeared inside. The door closed. Through the living room window, I could see 3 figures now. I raised my binoculars. Georgiana raised her phone. We didn't discuss our roles. We simply fell into them. Documentation happening automatically between us. Evidence gathering. Witness testimony. Building a case without speaking the words. Through my living room window, I watched a meeting begin at my own dining table. The man with the briefcase sat down, Edwin across from him. Euphemia appeared from the hallway, carrying a folder I recognized immediately. Red, worn at the edges, the one from my filing cabinet. My violated safe, my private papers. "That's him," Georgiana whispered. "That's Chavez." I lowered the binoculars long enough to look at her. "You're certain?" I looked up his real estate license after his second visit. Louis Chavez, commercial and residential. The name settled into my memory like evidence filed in a case folder. Louis Chavez, real estate agent. Meeting in my house at midnight with my son and daughter-in-law, with my private documents spread across my dining table. "Smart thinking," I said quietly. "Document everything," she replied. "You'll need it." I raised my phone and began taking photographs. The distance made some shots blurry, the window glass added glare, but enough came through clear, time-stamped, dated. Proof that this meeting happened, that these people gathered, that my papers changed hands without my knowledge or consent. 30 years of judicial work had taught me one fundamental truth. Evidence matters more than emotion. Whatever I felt watching this scene, and the feelings threatened to choke me, had to wait. Right now, only documentation mattered. The meeting stretched on. Chavez examined documents, holding them up to the light occasionally, checking signatures, watermarks, authenticity. Edwin's body language screamed nervousness, shoulders hunched, hands fidgeting, unable to maintain eye contact. But Euphemia sat confident and still, watching Chavez with the patience of someone certain of their position. Papers were signed, hands shook across the table. Then Euphemia disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle, 3 glasses. Champagne, small celebration. They toasted. Chavez laughed at something Edwin said. They were celebrating. In my house, with my papers, planning my destruction over drinks. I lowered my phone. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from fury held in check by sheer force of will. Georgiana's hand touched my shoulder briefly. "Keep photographing," she whispered. "Evidence, not emotion." She was right. I raised the phone again, captured the toast, the smiles, the confidence in their faces, every detail that would matter later when this ended up where I knew it would, in a courtroom. At 12:45, Chavez stood, gathered his briefcase. The 3 of them moved toward the front door. Georgiana and I quietly pushed the vacant house window open wider. The warm June night carried sound better than I'd hoped. The street was silent except for distant freeway hum. On my porch, Chavez's voice reached us clearly. If the power of attorney is legitimate, we close by July 15th, buyers offering $650,000 cash. The words landed like physical blows. Power of attorney, closing, buyer. They weren't just planning to steal my house, they were actively selling it. Edwin's response made it worse. It's legitimate. My father signed it months ago. The lie. The absolute, complete lie. I'd signed nothing. Authorized nothing. Given no permission for any of this. I'll need to verify with the title company, Chavez continued, but we're on track. Euphemia's voice, smooth and confident. Everything's in order. We've been planning this carefully. Planning carefully. The words echoed in my mind. While I'd walked through my days trusting them, they'd been planning. Carefully. Methodically. The theft of everything I'd built. The door closed. The sedan's engine started. Taillights disappeared down the street. The neighborhood returned to silence, but nothing would ever be silent again in my mind. I stood at the window, phone in hand, photographs stored, evidence collected. Georgiana beside me, her notebook full of times and descriptions. We'd witnessed it all, documented it all. He signed it months ago, I said, my voice barely controlled. I signed nothing. Forgery? Georgiana asked. Has to be. Question is how good a forgery. She looked at me, her expression serious. What will you do? I turned from the window, feeling something settle inside me. The shock was gone, the denial was gone. Only cold certainty remained. Let them think they're succeeding, then show them what happens when you underestimate a judge. Headlights swept down the street at 11:47, exactly as Georgiana had predicted. The black sedan moved with deliberate slowness, as if the driver was confirming the address in darkness. It pulled into my driveway, engine cutting with a mechanical click that carried across the silent street. I raised my binoculars. Beside me, Georgiana readied her phone. We'd been sitting at this window for hours, waiting for this moment. Now that it arrived, my pulse hammered in my ears. The driver's door opened. A man emerged, 40s, dark hair, business suit despite the midnight hour, leather briefcase in his right hand. He checked his watch with the gesture of someone confirming they were on time for an appointment they'd rather not keep at this hour. His head swiveled left, then right, scanning the neighborhood with cautious attention. "That's him," Georgiana whispered. "That's Chavez." I lowered the binoculars long enough to glance at her. "You're certain?" I looked up his real estate license after his second visit. Louis Chavez, commercial and residential. The name filed itself in my memory like a case citation. Louis Chavez. Real estate. Midnight meeting. The pieces were connecting, forming a picture I'd been dreading but needed to see completely. "Smart thinking," I murmured, raising my phone to photograph the license plate. Georgiana wrote down the number in her notebook without my asking. We'd fallen into an unspoken partnership, me capturing images, her recording details in precise handwriting. My front door opened before Chavez reached the porch. Edwin must have been watching from inside, waiting. They exchanged words I couldn't hear from this distance, just brief syllables and nods. No handshake. This was business, not social. Edwin stepped aside, Chavez entered, the door closed behind them. Through the living room window, I could now see three figures. I adjusted the binoculars, bringing the scene into focus. They were moving toward my dining table. Chavez set his briefcase down. Edwin pulled out chairs. Euphemia appeared from the direction of my study, and my stomach clenched. She carried the red folder. "That folder," I said, my voice hollow. "The red one. That's from my safe." Georgiana leaned closer. "What's in it?" "Property deed, original will, financial documents. Everything they'd need to steal it all." The words tasted like ash. I raised my phone and began photographing. The distance challenged the camera, about 60 yards across the street, and the window glass added glare, but enough images came through clear. Chavez sitting at the head of my dining table. Edwin to his right, posture stiff with tension even from here. Euphemia laying documents across the surface with organized precision. This was really happening, in my house, at my table, with my papers. Georgiana wrote continuously in her notebook. Time, 11:52 p.m. Subjects, 3 visible through front window. Documents, multiple papers spread on dining surface. Activity, apparent business meeting. Her nursing background showed in the clinical precision of her observations. Symptoms documented, evidence collected. No emotional commentary, just facts. Through the binoculars, I watched Chavez pick up documents one by one. He held several up to the light, checking watermarks, I realized, verifying authenticity. He'd done this before, knew what to look for in legitimate paperwork. The professional scrutiny should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me. If the forgery was good enough to pass that inspection, proving it false would be exponentially harder. Edwin's body language screamed discomfort. He kept shifting in his chair, fingers drumming the table edge, gaze darting between Chavez and Euphemia. Guilt radiated from every movement, but he didn't stop. Didn't stand up and end this. Just sat there, complicit in his own shame. Euphemia, by contrast, sat perfectly still, confident. When Chavez asked questions, I could see his mouth moving, gestures accompanying words. She answered with minimal movement, a nod, a brief response, the economy of motion that comes from certainty. She believed this would work, that they'd covered every angle, that I'd never know or never be able to stop it. The meeting stretched to 20 minutes, 30, 40. My legs went numb from sitting motionless. My shoulder ached from holding the phone steady for photographs. But I didn't move, couldn't. This was evidence unfolding in real time. Every second mattered. At some point, documents were slid across the table. Edwin signed something, then Euphemia. Their pens moved across pages I couldn't see clearly enough to identify, but I photographed each moment, time-stamped proof of signatures given, agreements made, fraud committed, because that's what this was. I'd signed nothing, authorized nothing. Every signature on those documents in my name had to be false. Chavez gathered papers into his briefcase, stood, extended his hand. Edwin shook it, then Euphemia. A business transaction concluded to everyone's satisfaction. Then, Euphemia disappeared toward the kitchen. "They're celebrating," Georgiana whispered. My jaw clenched. "They think they've won. They don't know you're watching. They don't know a lot of things yet." The words came out harder than intended. Georgiana glanced at me. "What are you planning?" "Justice." Euphemia returned carrying a bottle and 3 glasses. Champagne, I recognized the shape even through the window. She poured with theatrical flair, handed glasses to Edwin and Chavez. They raised them in unison. A toast. To what? To stealing my life? To their cleverness? To the $650,000 they thought they'd soon possess? I lowered my phone. My hands trembled with fury I barely controlled. Every instinct screamed to storm across the street, throw open the door, confront them with their betrayal. But 30 years on the bench had taught me better. Emotional reactions got dismissed. Evidence got convictions. Right now, I needed evidence more than satisfaction. "Keep photographing," Georgiana's voice reached me through the red haze. Evidence, not emotion. I raised the phone again. Captured the champagne toast, the smiles. Chavez laughing at something Edwin said. The comfortable conspiracy of people who believed themselves safe. At 12:45, Chavez set down his glass. The meeting was concluding. They moved toward the front door, out of my sightline through the window. I lowered the binoculars and looked at Georgiana. She was already moving, crossing to the vacant house's front window, the one that faced the street directly. I followed. She eased it open, just inches. The warm June night flowed in, still 90 degrees even at this hour, carrying the scent of heated pavement and desert creosote. The front door of my house opened. They stepped onto the porch, Chavez first, briefcase in hand, then Edwin and Euphemia behind him. The porch light illuminated them clearly, 50 yards away now, closer than before. In the silent neighborhood, their voices carried. "If the power of attorney is legitimate, we close by July 15th. Chavez's voice, professional and businesslike. "Buyers offering $650,000 cash." The words hit me like verdict reading. Power of attorney, closing date, cash sale. They weren't just planning, they were executing. This was real, active, already in motion. "It's legitimate." Edwin's voice trying for confidence but landing somewhere near desperation. My father signed it months ago. The lie. The absolute complete lie. I'd signed nothing. No power of attorney, no authorization to sell, no permission for any action regarding my property. The document had to be forged. The question was whether it would fool the title company. I'll need to verify with the title company, Chavez said, answering my unspoken question. But we're on track. Euphemia's voice cut through, smooth and certain. Everything's in order. We've been planning this carefully. Carefully. The word echoed in my mind. While I'd walked my neighborhood, read my books, trusted my son, they'd been planning, carefully, methodically, probably for months. The break into my study hadn't been the beginning. It had been part of an operation already well underway. Handshakes exchanged, brief goodbyes. Chavez walked to his car, started the engine. Taillights glowed red as he backed down the driveway, then disappeared down the street. Edwin and Euphemia remained on the porch a moment, watching him go. Then they turned to each other. Edwin said something I couldn't hear. Euphemia laughed, a sound that carried clearly in the night air, musical and triumphant. They went back inside. The door closed. Lights in the living room went dark. They were going to bed. The night's work complete. Tomorrow they'd wake up one step closer to stealing everything I'd built. I stood at the open window, phone in hand, photographs stored, dozens of images, time-stamped evidence. Georgiana beside me, her notebook filled with precise observations. We had documentation, witnesses, proof. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed to understand the full scope. Know every player, map every move before I struck back. He signed it months ago, I said quietly, testing the words. I signed nothing. Forgery? Georgiana asked. Has to be. Question is how good a forgery. If it passes the title company's verification, proving it false becomes exponentially harder. What will you do? I turned from the window, feeling the last traces of shock burn away. What remained was cold clarity, judicial focus. 3 decades of processing evidence, building cases, finding truth in testimony and documents. All of that experience condensed into single purpose now. Let them think they're succeeding, I said. Let them believe I'm still in Arizona, somewhere looking at canyon views. Let them take every step they've planned. I'll document it all. Then, when they think they've won, I'll show them what happens when you try to con a judge. Georgiana nodded slowly. You'll need a lawyer, someone who specializes in this. I have someone in mind, Marcus Webb, practiced before me for years. He owes me for going easy on his drunk driving case. When will you act? Not yet. Not until I have everything. They mentioned July 15th closing. That gives me 3 weeks to build an airtight case. I look back toward my house, now mostly dark except for the porch light. They're going to close, sign all the papers, accept the money, then I'm going to take it all away and send them to prison for it. Georgiana was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what this means. You'll have to prosecute your own son. The words hung between us. I'd been avoiding that truth, keeping it at the edges of my consciousness. But she was right. This path led to criminal charges, fraud, forgery, theft. If I saw this through, Edwin would face prison time, my son. The boy I'd raised, taught to ride a bike, put through law school, stood beside at his wedding. I looked at Georgiana, and when I spoke, my voice was steady. He made his choice when he decided to steal from me. I'm making mine when I decide to stop him. She nodded once, accepting that. What do you need from me? Keep watching when I can't be here. Document anything unusual. Be ready to testify if it comes to that. I can do that. We stood together in the darkness of the vacant house, 2 old people watching the night reclaim silence. Across the street, my home sat still. Inside, my son and his wife slept peacefully, confident in their plan. They had no idea their celebration was premature. The judge was back in session, and court was about to begin. Dawn broke over the desert, orange light spilling through the motel room's thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed from the surveillance, phone in my hand, displaying photographs from the midnight meeting. Beside me, Georgiana's notebook lay open to her precise observations, times, descriptions, Luis Chavez's words captured in her neat handwriting. I hadn't slept, couldn't. My mind kept circling back to those overheard phrases. $650,000, July 15th. Power of attorney. Edwin's voice saying, "My father signed it months ago." The lie echoed in my skull like a gavel strike, but knowing they were selling wasn't enough. I needed to see the documents themselves, understand the architecture of their deception. A case built on observation alone was weak. I needed the smoking gun, the forged signature, the fraudulent paperwork, the proof that would withstand scrutiny in any courtroom. I stood, poured cold coffee from the pot I'd made hours ago, and began planning. 3 days. I spent 3 days studying their patterns from my surveillance position across the street. Edwin left for his downtown office every morning at 8:30, like clockwork. Euphemia went shopping on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Scottsdale Fashion Square, usually gone at least 2 hours based on when her SUV returned. Today was Thursday, July 6th, my window of opportunity. I watched from my pickup truck parked 2 blocks down, baseball cap pulled low. Edwin's silver sedan backed out of the driveway at 8:27. Routine, predictable. 43 minutes later, Euphemia's black SUV followed, her sunglasses catching the morning light as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror before driving away. I waited 10 more minutes, long enough to be certain they wouldn't return for forgotten purses or phones. Then I drove to my own house, parked in the driveway like I belonged there, because I did, and pulled out my key. The lock turned smoothly, my own house, my own door, yet my hands trembled slightly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air conditioning hummed. The television played quietly in the living room, creating the illusion of occupancy probably. I stood in my own foyer, feeling like an intruder, and the wrongness of that sensation hardened something in my chest. The guest room, my former guest room, had been converted into Edwin's temporary office. I'd seen him working in there through the windows during surveillance. Now I opened the door and stepped inside. The desk held the usual debris of modern work: laptop, papers, coffee-stained notepad. I opened drawers systematically: financial statements, work documents, insurance papers. Then the bottom drawer, and there it was. The red folder from the midnight meeting with Chavez. It wasn't even locked, just sitting there, buried under some manila envelopes, as if they'd grown so confident they didn't bother hiding it properly. The arrogance of it made my jaw clench. I spread the contents across the desk surface. Power of attorney document dated May 20th. My signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. Close. Very close. Someone had studied my handwriting carefully. But the pressure points were wrong. The loop on the L in Lawrence didn't quite match, and most tellingly, the ink appeared newer than the paper. "Close," I murmured aloud, photographing it from multiple angles. But the L in Lawrence, I loop it differently, and the date ink, sloppy work. Probably an online forgery service, the kind that advertised on dark web forums. They'd claim I was senile if challenged, that I'd signed but forgotten. It wouldn't work, not against evidence I was collecting. I photographed every page: the power of attorney, the preliminary sales agreement with buyer Richard Thompson from California. Closing date, July 18th, not the 15th, Chavez had mentioned, I noted, 3 days later. Purchase price confirmed, $650,000, cash sale. Then, as I was about to replace everything, printed pages slipped from between 2 folders, email correspondence. I almost missed them. The first line froze me in place. "Marcus, once the sale closes, I'll have my half, $325,000, enough to start over." I read standing there, phone forgotten in my hand. Euphemia's emails to someone in Los Angeles. Plans detailed with brutal efficiency. After closing, she'd take the children, leave Edwin, move to California where this Marcus person waited. Edwin believed they were buying a new house in Scottsdale together. He had no idea she was abandoning him the moment money transferred. "Edwin thinks we're buying a house here. He has no idea I'm leaving." My son was being used. Tool, disposable means to an end. The realization should have brought satisfaction, evidence of karma, perhaps. Instead, it just deepened the hollow ache in my chest. Betrayal all the way down. Him betraying me. Her betraying him. Everyone using everyone. But it didn't change anything. He'd chosen this path, made his decisions. That he was also a victim of manipulation didn't absolve him of his actions against me. I photographed the emails, every page, every damning word, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. The folder back in the drawer, angled the same direction. The emails between the manila envelopes. The desk surface cleared of any trace of my presence. Walking through the house one final time, I let myself look at it properly, built 30 years ago. Every corner familiar. The kitchen where I'd taught Edwin to cook eggs. The living room where we'd watched football games. The hallway where pictures still hung. My late wife's smile. Edwin's graduation. Family vacations that now felt like they had happened to different people. Memories poisoned by present betrayal. I left through the back door, cut through the neighbor's yard to where my truck waited 2 blocks over, and drove back to the motel without looking in the rearview mirror. In the motel room, I spread everything out. Phone connected to laptop, transferring photographs. Georgiana's notebook cross-referenced with my new evidence. The picture was complete now. Not just suspicions or observed meetings, but documentation. Proof. The kind that survived appeals and cross-examination. I called Georgiana from the truck, voice steadier than I felt. I have everything, documents, evidence, proof of forgery. You went inside? Her concern was immediate. My house, my evidence. They're selling it July 18th. A pause. Then, what's your next move? I stopped being reactive. Time to build a prosecution. After hanging up, I sat alone in the motel room with photos displayed across the laptop screen, the forged signature, the sales agreement, Euphemia's emails planning her escape, Edwin's temporary office that screamed of someone living in liminal space, preparing for a future he didn't realize would never arrive. They'd wanted to play games with a judge. Fine. Court was now in session. I opened a legal pad and began making lists. Steps needed, evidence to gather, legal professionals to contact. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about building an airtight case, the kind I'd spent 30 years constructing from the bench. And I never lost cases where evidence was this clear. I stared at the forged signature on my screen, at the careful but flawed reproduction of my handwriting, and felt the last traces of pain burn away into something colder, purer. They'd made me the hunter. Now they'd learn what that meant. Tomorrow I'd begin building the legal fortress that would crush them. Tonight, I organized evidence and planned strategy with the precision of someone who'd done this for 3 decades. Let them think they still had time. Let them believe the closing would happen smoothly. Let them pack their bags and count their anticipated money. The trap works best when prey doesn't see it until too late. I stared at my laptop screen until the photographs blurred together. Evidence, forgery, betrayal. The words had become clinical, detached from the personal devastation they represented. This was better. Emotion clouded judgment. I needed the clarity that came from treating this like any other case that crossed my bench. Except this time, I was plaintiff, investigator, and judge rolled into one. The legal pad beside the laptop filled with notes as I researched Arizona real estate law, trust structures, forgery penalties. Coffee cups accumulated on the nightstand. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher, but in the motel room, I barely noticed. This was what I'd done for 30 years. Build legal cases so airtight they suffocated opposition. By evening, I had my strategy. The next morning, I dressed in a full suit for the first time since this began. Navy blue, conservative tie, polished shoes. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I saw Judge Lawrence returning. Not the confused homeowner, not the devastated father, the man who'd presided over hundreds of trials, who'd built a reputation on meticulous preparation and devastating cross-examination. I packed my evidence folder in a briefcase and drove into Central Scottsdale. Margaret Chen's notary office occupied a small storefront between an insurance agency and a coffee shop. I'd known her 15 years through the court system. She handled document verification for countless cases. Professional, discreet, thorough. She looked up from her desk as I entered, recognition followed by concern crossing her face. "Wilbert, I heard you were traveling. Change of plans." I sat across from her and slid a handwritten affidavit across the desk. "I need this notarized and filed." She read it slowly, eyes widening slightly. When she looked up, questions hovered unspoken, but she asked none of them. "This states you never signed a power of attorney?" "Correct. Never executed one, never authorized anyone to act on my behalf regarding my property." "If someone's using forged documents..." "That's exactly what's happening," I interrupted. Her expression shifted from concern to something harder, professional outrage maybe. This creates legal record. You understand the implications? I'm counting on the implications. She typed the official version, had me sign under oath, applied her notary seal with deliberate precision. The stamp's thud sounded like a gavel strike. She printed multiple copies, one for me, one for her records, one for the county recorder. This is serious, Wilbert. I know. She handed me the certified copies, and our eyes met. 30 years of mutual respect compressed into that moment. She wouldn't ask questions I couldn't answer. I wouldn't explain more than necessary. The document spoke for itself. Foundation laid. From the notary, I drove directly to Desert Vista Bank. The marble lobby felt overly cold, air conditioning fighting the July heat. Thomas Burke, branch manager, rose from his desk when he saw me. We'd known each other 20 years. He'd handled my accounts since he was an assistant manager fresh out of business school. Wilbert, thought you were at the Grand Canyon. Shortened the trip. I settled into the chair across from his desk. I need to place a formal hold on any real estate transactions involving my property. His expression shifted immediately to professional concern. Transaction hold requires significant cause. Attempted fraudulent sale. Documents with forged authorization. He frowned, fingers already moving toward his keyboard. You're certain? 30 years as judge teaches you to recognize forged signatures. I'm certain. He typed rapidly, paused to read something on screen, typed more. Hold placed immediately. No transfers without you physically present. Photo ID verified. Verbal confirmation recorded. He printed the confirmation, stamped it with bank seal, handed it across. Sorry you're dealing with this. I took the paperwork, feeling another wall slide into place. Appreciate the quick action, Thomas. Always. He shook my hand firmly. Let me know if you need anything else. Second barrier erected. After a quick lunch I didn't taste, I drove to Northwest Scottsdale, to the office of Catherine Morrison, trust and estate attorney, expensive but necessary. I'd researched her credentials the night before, 15 years specializing in asset protection, excellent reputation, no connection to Edwin or Euphemia that might compromise discretion. Her office was all polished wood and leather furniture, the kind of place that announced competence and cost. She listened to my carefully edited explanation, concerned homeowner wanting asset protection. No mention of family, no details about forgery. Just a man who wanted his property secured. Irrevocable living trust is your best option, she said after I finished. Asset protection, probate avoidance, complete control maintained by you as trustee. How quickly can this be established? I can draft it today, file with the county by end of business. She opened her laptop, fingers flying across keys. Date of establishment? This was the crucial moment. May 15th. She didn't question it. Client prerogative. She drafted the trust documents over the next 2 hours while I waited, reviewing each section with me, explaining implications I already understood, but let her detail anyway. Professional courtesy. This means you can't easily reverse it, she cautioned. You're sure? I need asset protection, absolute protection. May I ask what's prompting this urgency? I kept my voice measured, revealing nothing. Let's say I've learned that family doesn't always mean safety. Understanding flickered across her face. She'd seen this before, probably. Estate planning often exposed family dysfunction. The trust will provide that protection. She finalized the documents, had me sign in multiple places, notarized them herself, and filed electronically with Maricopa County that afternoon. By 4 p.m., my house legally existed within an irrevocable trust with me as sole trustee, which meant Edwin's forged power of attorney, dated after the trust establishment, was worthless. You can't sell property you don't control, and he didn't control property in a trust. The legal trap had sprung before they even knew it existed. I paid her $3,500, money well spent, and drove back to the motel, feeling the pieces lock into place. That evening, I transformed the motel room into a war room. Documents spread across every surface: bed, desk, small table by the window. I organized evidence into labeled folders. Folder 1, surveillance photos and Georgiana's dated observations. Folder 2, forged documents and comparative signature analysis. Folder 3, notarized affidavit and legal preventive measures. Folder 4, Georgiana's formal witness statement. Folder 5. Trust documents proving ownership structure predated forgery. I photographed everything, made copies. One set stayed with me. Tomorrow I'd place a second set in a safe deposit box. The third would go to Georgiana for safekeeping. Nothing left to chance. I called her from the motel, voice calm despite the adrenaline still humming through my system. Legal framework is in place. Properties in trust, banks locked down, forgeries documented. When will you confront them? She asked. July 18th, at the closing table. A pause. Why wait? Maximum impact. Let them think they've won, then watch their world collapse in public. That's cold, Wilbert. That's justice. After we hung up, I sat surrounded by evidence folders, staring at the organization I'd created. Prosecution files, everything labeled, cross-referenced, time-stamped. The kind of preparation that destroyed defendants. They chose deception, I said quietly to the empty room. Forgery, theft from family. I paused, staring at the photo of the forged signature on my laptop screen, the careful but flawed reproduction of my handwriting, the arrogance of thinking they could fool me. I choose law, evidence, consequences they can't escape. I closed the folder with finality, feeling something settle in my chest. Not peace, not satisfaction, just cold certainty. 12 days until closing. 12 days until they walked into the room thinking they'd won, only to discover every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd counted had been anticipated, documented, weaponized against them. The legal fortress was complete, unbreachable, devastating. Now, I just needed to go home and watch them walk into it. Tomorrow, I'd return from my vacation. Let them think they still had time. Let them relax into false confidence. Let them believe the hard part was over. The trap works best when prey doesn't see it until too late. And I'd spent 30 years learning exactly how to set traps that never failed. My pickup truck turned into the driveway on July 14th, just after 2 in the afternoon. The Arizona sun blazed overhead, same as always. The lawn looked freshly watered, edges trimmed with precision. My house sat exactly as I'd left it 2 weeks ago, except everything was different now. I knew what lived inside those walls, the planning, the betrayal, the midnight meetings and forged documents. I knew, and they didn't know I knew. That imbalance of information was the final weapon in my arsenal. Through the windshield, I watched the front curtain twitch. Someone had seen me arrive. Good. Let them panic while pretending everything was normal. I grabbed my suitcase from the truck bed, moved slowly toward the door like any tired traveler returning from a failed vacation. My keys fumbled slightly, calculated clumsiness. The lock turned. I pushed the door open and called out, "I'm home. Trip didn't work out." Edwin appeared from the kitchen within seconds, his face frozen in surprise before muscle memory forced a smile into place. "Dad, you're back early. Everything all right?" Behind him, Euphemia descended the stairs, her eyes calculating distances and timelines. 4 days early, not what they'd planned, but the closing was still scheduled for Friday. They still thought they had time. I set down my luggage with exaggerated weariness. Altitude got to me, headaches, figured I'd be more comfortable here. That's too bad. Euphemia's voice carried perfect false sympathy, but probably smart to come home. I looked around my own living room, as if seeing it fresh. Good to be back. Miss my own bed. They exchanged a glance, quick, loaded with meaning I pretended not to catch. Relief mixed with recalculation. I shuffled toward my study, saying I needed to check mail, and they let me go. Inside the study, I scanned quickly. Everything appeared untouched, though I knew they'd rifled through it weeks ago. The filing cabinet lock still bore scratches from their break-in. I ran my finger over the damage, memorizing details for future testimony, then returned to the living room. That evening's dinner became psychological warfare. Edwin launched his attack disguised as concern. "Dad, I've been meaning to mention, you seem a bit forgetful lately." I paused mid-bite, fork suspended, set it down with careful precision. Forgetful how? Little things, misplacing items, confusion about dates. Euphemia leaned forward, voice dripping support. "It's natural at your age. Maybe see a doctor, just to be safe." My hand slipped into my pocket, found my phone, pressed record. Every word would be captured now. "I suppose I have been a bit scattered." "Nothing to worry about." Edwin's relief was visible. just want you taken care of. I saw what they were building, the foundation for their defense when the forgery was discovered. Old man didn't know what he was signing. Dementia, confusion, cognitive decline. They were creating their escape route, not realizing they were actually constructing evidence of consciousness of guilt. I let uncertainty show on my face, touch my temple as if trying to remember something. Do I really seem that confused? Not confused, Euphemia corrected smoothly. Just tired. You've been through a lot. The next day at lunch, she sprung the real trap. Wilbert, remember those papers from last month? Legal documents? I furrowed my brow, appearing to strain for memory. Papers? What papers? Power of attorney forms. You signed them. For Edwin to help with finances. My confusion was genuine. I'd never signed any such thing. But to them, my blank expression read as memory loss. Did I sign something? I can't. It's fuzzy. Edwin jumped in quickly. It's fine, Dad. Don't stress. Just routine paperwork. I appeared relieved. If you say so. My memory isn't what it was. The triumph that flashed across Euphemia's face was barely concealed. Edwin relaxed visibly. They believed they'd successfully planted reasonable doubt about my mental state. They thought they were building an unassailable defense. Instead, every word was being recorded, every false accusation of dementia, every attempt to manufacture confusion, evidence that they knew the power of attorney was unauthorized and were trying to create cover after the fact. That evening, after they'd retreated to their wing of the house, I sat in my study with earbuds in, listening to the recordings. Edwin's voice, Dad, you're confused lately. Euphemia's voice. Those papers you signed last month. I connected the phone to my laptop, saved the files with timestamps, burned copies to a USB drive, emailed encrypted versions to Catherine Morrison with the subject line, Evidence of Fraudulent Intent, July 14th to 15, 2025. Later that night, I passed their bedroom door and heard their voices through the gap. He doesn't even remember signing. Edwin's voice low and relieved. Perfect. If he challenges anything, we cite cognitive decline. You think he'll challenge it? He won't know until it's done. 3 more days. Then we're clear. Then we're free. I stood in the darkened hallway, recording their conversation on my phone. They had no idea I was there. No idea every word was evidence. No idea the trap had already closed around them. Back in my study, I opened my laptop and typed a message to Catherine Morrison. They've taken the bait, establishing narrative of cognitive decline. Her response came within minutes. Recordings clear? Crystal clear. Evidence of consciousness of guilt. See you Friday, 2 p.m. This will be decisive. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing but cold certainty. They have no idea what's waiting. 3 days crawled past. I maintained the performance flawlessly, confused, forgetful, harmless, asked Euphemia to repeat simple things, paused before answering basic questions. Let them see what they wanted to see. An old man losing his grip, unable to remember what he'd signed, incapable of mounting legal challenges. Each morning, I watched them grow more confident. Each evening, I reviewed my evidence, adding their new lies to the growing file. Friday morning arrived. I dressed in my courtroom suit, navy blue, perfect Windsor knot in my tie, shoes polished to military shine, picked up my leather briefcase, the one I'd carried for 30 years on the bench. Inside, organized folders, each labeled, each containing evidence that would destroy them. I walked into the kitchen where they sat over coffee. I have some errands to run. Be back later. They smiled, relieved, probably thought I was going to the bank or grocery store. Harmless old man activities. In 4 hours, they'd be at the escrow office expecting to sign away my home and collect $650,000. Instead, they'd face the consequences of betraying a judge. I drove toward Scottsdale with the calm focus of a prosecutor about to present an unbeatable case. No anxiety, no doubt. Just the certainty that comes from 3 decades of legal experience and evidence so solid it could withstand any challenge. They'd wanted to play games. Fine. Court was now in session, and I never lost cases where the evidence was this clear. Desert Sun Escrow occupied the 2nd floor of a modern office building in North Scottsdale. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see them gathered around the table at 1:50 p.m. Luis Chavez sat at the head, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. Edwin and Euphemia sat on the left side, dressed professionally, nervous energy barely contained. Richard Thompson, the California buyer, occupied the right side, distinguished man, silver hair, expensive suit. Sarah Martinez, the escrow officer, arranged paperwork at the far end. Everything proceeding normally, just another real estate closing. I checked my watch, 2 p.m. exactly. Catherine Morrison stood beside me in the hallway, her own briefcase in hand. Ready? I've been ready for 2 weeks. I opened the conference room door. All heads turned. The conversations died instantly. I saw Edwin's face drain of color, saw Euphemia half rise from her chair before catching herself. Chavez looked confused. Thompson looked annoyed. Martinez looked concerned. I walked to the empty end of the table, Morrison behind me, didn't remove my jacket, set my briefcase down with a decisive click that echoed in the suddenly silent room. Good afternoon. My voice carried the authority of 3 decades from the bench. I'm Wilbert Lawrence, actual owner of the property you're attempting to purchase. Wilbert! Euphemia stood now. What are you doing here? I ignored her, addressed Martinez directly. This transaction cannot proceed. The power of attorney you're relying on is forged. Edwin's voice shook. Dad, this isn't... Be quiet, Edwin. I opened my briefcase, removed the first folder, read tab labeled affidavit, walked around the table, placed it directly in front of Martinez. I'm presenting evidence now. She opened it, began reading. I returned to my briefcase. Here's my sworn statement that I never executed any power of attorney, never authorized anyone to conduct transactions involving my property. I removed the second folder, blue tab. Morrison took this one, handed it to Martinez. Mr. Lawrence's property was transferred into an irrevocable living trust on May 15th, 1 month before the alleged power of attorney date. Morrison's voice was professional, precise. As sole trustee, Mr. Lawrence is the only person authorized to conduct transactions involving this property. Here's the county filing. Martinez examined the documents, checking dates, reviewing filing stamps. Looked up at Chavez. Did you verify trust status before proceeding? Chavez's face reddened. The power of attorney appeared legitimate. Standard documentation? Standard would include a title search revealing the trust, Morrison interrupted. Thompson stood abruptly. You told me this was clean. Euphemia tried to regain control. This is a misunderstanding. Wilbert signed but is confused. His memory... I pulled out my phone. Let me clarify my memory. This recording is from 2 days ago. I tapped the screen twice. Euphemia's voice filled the room, clear and damning. If he challenges anything, we cite cognitive decline. Edwin's voice, 3 more days, then we're clear. Euphemia again. Then we're free. I stopped the playback. The silence was absolute. Does that sound like someone who innocently believed I signed documents? I removed the third folder, black tab labeled evidence. Opened it so everyone could see. Surveillance photographs, timestamps. Your midnight meeting with Mr. Chavez on July 2nd. The document spread across my dining table. Edwin signing papers. Euphemia presenting my private files from my broken safe. I swiped through photos on my phone, then projected them on my laptop screen for everyone to see. Each image time-stamped, each one undeniable. Thompson leaned forward, studied the photos, then turned to Chavez with disgust. This is fraud. I'm calling my attorney. I was provided falsified documents. Chavez's voice rose. They misrepresented. We didn't know, Edwin started. You broke into my safe. My voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Forged my signature. Met with Mr. Chavez at midnight while you thought I was away. You knew exactly what you were doing. Euphemia's face hardened into defiance. You can't prove... I opened the fourth folder. Green tab. Comparative signature analysis. My genuine signature versus the forgery. Note the pressure differences. The loop formation on the L in Lawrence. The ink age discrepancy. I laid it on the table where everyone could see. What can I prove? Martinez closed her file folder with finality. This closing cannot proceed. I'm required to report suspected fraud to authorities. Thompson was already gathering his things. Chavez, you assured me the documentation was verified. I'll be speaking with my attorney about your negligence. Edwin found his voice finally. Dad, please, we can fix this. Just talk to us. I began collecting my folders, returning them to my briefcase in perfect order. I spent 30 years determining consequences for people who broke the law. That doesn't change because you're my son. I'm still your family." I paused, looked at him directly across the table, held his gaze until he looked away. "You stopped being my family when you tried to steal my home. Now you're just defendants." I closed my briefcase with the same decisive click as opening, looked at Martinez. "You'll have my cooperation with any investigation." To Thompson, "I apologize you were drawn into this." Morrison opened the door. I walked through it without looking back. Behind us, voices erupted. Recrimination, panic, blame shifting. Edwin called my name once. I didn't turn around. In the elevator, Morrison spoke quietly. "That was devastating. That was justice. What's next?" "Police station to file criminal complaints, then the bank to secure new accounts, then home to change the locks." I watched the floor numbers descend. They're not welcome anymore. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Bright Arizona sunlight poured through the glass walls. I walked out into it, Morrison beside me, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The house was mine again. The battle was won. Now came the consequences they had earned. I climbed into my truck, set the briefcase on the passenger seat, and pulled out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see the office building receding. Inside that conference room, their world was collapsing, plans destroyed, money gone, criminal charges looming. I'd spent 30 years on the bench teaching that actions have consequences. That justice, while sometimes slow, eventually finds its mark. That betrayal of trust, especially family trust, carries the heaviest penalties. Today, Edwin and Euphemia had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. I drove toward the police station, my evidence folders organized and ready. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. This was the law working as designed, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, punishing those who thought they were clever enough to escape consequences. They'd underestimated a judge. That was their first mistake. Thinking I wouldn't fight back was their second. Now they'd spend years learning from both. Detective Maria Rodriguez sat across from me at the Scottsdale Police Department, reviewing my evidence folder. Catherine Morrison waited beside me as I laid out the case. Forged power of attorney. I slid the document across. Signature analysis shows inconsistencies. Surveillance photos from the midnight meeting with Chavez. Audio recordings of them discussing how they'd claim I was cognitively impaired. I played Euphemia's voice. "If he challenges anything, we cite cognitive decline." Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Mr. Lawrence, you're accusing your own son of felony fraud." "I'm reporting a crime that happens to involve my son. Some fathers would let this go. Some fathers didn't spend 30 years upholding the law. I'm not that father." Over the following week, Edwin confessed during interrogation, admitted knowing participation. Euphemia denied everything until shown her California emails, then blamed Edwin entirely. They were turning on each other. "She filed for divorce this morning," Rodriguez informed me. "She was planning to leave him anyway." Morrison filed civil suit simultaneously, $100,000 for damages. "They'll likely never pay it," she warned. "The judgment follows them forever. That's the point." The eviction hearing came July 29th. Judge Sarah Chen, my former clerk, heard the evidence and ruled swiftly. Eviction granted, 10 days to vacate. August 1st, moving day. I watched from my study as they loaded a rental truck. When nearly finished, Edwin came to the door alone. "Dad, please give me another chance." I studied the man who'd broken into my safe, forged my signature. "You made calculated choices, Edwin. You chose this path. You're my father. I was your father. You made me a victim instead." I closed the door, locked it, changed all the locks that afternoon. The criminal case moved towards sentencing. 18 months probation for Edwin, 2 years for Euphemia. Permanent records, certain consequences. August 28th arrived. I dressed in my courtroom suit and drove downtown to watch my son receive his judgment. Maricopa County Superior Court felt different from the public side. For 30 years I'd entered through judicial corridors. Now I passed through metal detectors, found courtroom 4B, took a seat in the gallery. Edwin and Euphemia sat at separate defense tables. Neither turned to acknowledge me. Judge Michael Harrison entered. "All rise." The clerk called the case. Edwin stood first, voice barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor." Euphemia followed, stronger but defiant. Guilty. Harrison read portions of my victim impact statement aloud. For 30 years I upheld the law from this bench. They broke into my safe, forged my signature, attempted to steal my home while I slept under its roof. The relationship doesn't excuse the crime, it makes it worse. The silence was absolute. This court takes family fraud seriously, Harrison continued. You exploited trust, forged documents, attempted to steal from someone who'd given you shelter. He consulted his notes. Edwin Lawrence, 18 months supervised probation, 200 hours community service, $15,000 fine, $50,000 restitution. Euphemia Lawrence, 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, $25,000 fine, $50,000 restitution, 5-year ban from real estate. The gavel came down. I walked out without looking back. On the courthouse steps, Georgiana waited. Justice prevailed? As it always does, sometimes it just needs assistance. What's next? Volunteer work, legal advice for seniors, making sure this doesn't happen to someone else. I drove home through familiar Scottsdale streets, past landmarks that had become chapters in this story. The bank, Morrison's office, the escrow building, where everything collapsed. In my driveway, I sat quietly before getting out. 30 years on the bench. Never thought my own son would stand where defendants stood. He'd had every advantage: education, support, integrity modeled daily. He chose greed instead. I'd chosen justice. That was the difference between us. Some fathers would have forgiven him, preserved the relationship at any cost. But that would have made me a victim. I hadn't survived 30 years in courtrooms by accepting victimhood. I walked to my door. New locks, empty rooms, peace restored. Would Edwin contact me again? Probably not. I'd lost my son. That hurt. It would always hurt, but I'd kept my dignity, my home, my self-respect. Justice isn't always kind, but it's always right. I made coffee and opened my laptop to research volunteer legal programs for seniors, transforming pain into purpose, turning betrayal into protection for those more vulnerable. They'd tried to make me a victim. I'd refused. That refusal, that was the real victory. Some bonds are sacred, some betrayals are unforgivable, and that's okay. The house was quiet, mine alone now, safe, defended, home. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.